Have you ever heard someone say the United States should be run according to the Bible? It's a pretty common talking point, especially in political circles. It often ties into the idea that America is, or was, founded as a Christian nation. But let's take a moment and really unpack what that would mean. Should a modern diverse government really operate based on an ancient religious text? First, let's address the whole Christian nation idea. While many of the founders were Christian, they were also products of the Enlightenment. They deeply valued reason and were wary of the religious wars that had torn Europe apart for centuries. That's why they enshrined the separation of church and state in the First Amendment. They didn't want any single religion to have official power over the government. So, historically, the foundation isn't as simple as this is a Christian nation. It's a nation that guarantees freedom of religion, which also means freedom from religion being imposed by the state. Now let's get into the practical side of things. Could you actually make rational modern-day decisions using the Bible as a government handbook? Think about it. The Bible was written thousands of years ago by different authors in different cultures for different audiences. It addresses issues relevant to ancient agrarian societies. How would it guide us on complex modern issues like net neutrality, artificial intelligence ethics, or international trade agreements? The simple answer is, it wouldn't. Applying ancient texts to modern governance is like trying to use a horse and buggy manual to fix a self-driving car. And that brings us to a more challenging question. Is the Bible always moral by today's standards? While it contains beautiful messages of love, compassion, and justice, it also includes passages that condone practices we now find abhorrent. Things like slavery, the subjugation of women, and brutal punishments for minor offenses are all in there. If we were to govern by the Bible, would we have to do it literally? Would we be stoning people for working on the Sabbath? Would we have to find a talking snake to get some legal clarification? Of course not, that sounds absurd. But that absurdity highlights a massive problem: interpretation. There isn't just one way to read the Bible. There are thousands of different Christian denominations, and they all interpret Scripture differently. Who gets to decide which interpretation becomes law? A Baptist's reading is different from a Catholic's, which is different from a Methodist's. If one group's interpretation becomes law, it inherently infringes on the religious freedom of all the others, not to mention non-Christians. This is where the real danger lies. When you have a text that is so open to interpretation, it becomes incredibly easy for those in power to cherry-pick verses to justify their own agenda. Want to cut social programs? You could find a verse to support it. Want to expand them? You could find a different verse. A politician could use the Bible not as a source of divine guidance, but as a tool to consolidate power, effectively making themselves or their party the ultimate authority, cloaked in the language of faith. They could essentially create their own version of God, or even position themselves as a king-like figure, using divine right to justify their actions. We already know that politicians can be corrupt. Now imagine giving them a holy book to twist and use as justification for that corruption. It's a recipe for disaster. It would allow them to sidestep accountability by claiming they are just following God's will. Let's look at some specific examples. Many Christians today are strong advocates for social justice, inspired by Jesus' teachings. Jesus consistently spoke about caring for the poor, the sick, and the marginalized. He famously said, "Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Yet we often see politicians who publicly profess their Christian faith vote to cut funding for food assistance programs, housing support, and health care for the needy. If we were truly governing by the example of Jesus, wouldn't things like universal health care and robust social safety nets be a top priority? It seems contradictory that the very people who advocate for a Bible-based government are often the ones who vote against policies that reflect the core compassionate teachings of Jesus. Instead, rights like access to healthcare are turned into political bargaining chips. Ultimately, the idea of running the government from the Bible, while it might sound pious to some, is fundamentally incompatible with the principles of a free and pluralistic society. Our strength as a nation comes from our diversity of thought, belief, and background. The separation of church and state isn't an attack on religion. It's the very thing that protects it. It ensures that no single faith can dominate, and everyone is free to believe or not believe as they see fit. I believe most people, when they really think about it, support this separation. We would be a much better, fairer, and more rational country if we kept religion out of our government's legal framework. Let faith guide individuals in their personal lives, in their acts of charity, and in their communities. But let our laws be guided by reason, empathy, and a commitment to justice for all citizens, regardless of what they believe. Thanks for sticking with me through this. It's a complex topic, but an important one to think about. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into topics like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. See you next time.